As we continue to move through our primer, the next section to quickly discuss is what is master keying. Master keying was succinctly stated by Ralph Forrest Ball, CML. Master keying is the process of making two different keys operate the same lock. It's just that simple. Two or more different keys operate the same lock, to be sure, but you've got more than one key is going to operate it. Now, what's interesting about the term master, it's a term that we all use, understand in our own way what master means. Grandmasters, great grandmasters, some people have even used the term submasters, and submaster is actually an appropriate term to use in a very unusual level of keying. So it's not a term that we use typically. If you're using the term submaster, it's probably being used out of technically proper context. So you might want to understand that if your client is saying that, they probably are meaning, well, they probably are not thinking three levels of keying, meaning grandmaster, submaster, change key. They're probably thinking master key and then a submaster, meaning a key that has lower rights than a master, is what I've encountered when people use that term submaster. They use the term master, but they don't really mean master. They want to have 20 locks, and there is a master, and then each will have their own submaster. And I think sometimes that's code for just keyed differently, or you've got 20 locks that are mastered, and you've got change keys 1AA through 20AA is what it would end up being. And we'll talk about the standard key coding symbol when we get to that section. But it is just simply that. When two different keys operate a cylinder, you've got master keying going on. Back to what's interesting about the term, if you look in early, very, very early 20th century catalogs, and probably the 1895 or the 1905 Corbin catalog, has a statement in it about master keying. It's not a key, the term master. It doesn't apply to a physical key that you stick into a cylinder. It was actually used in the context of the master of the home, the person who is the boss, whomever it might be in that role. But it was most definitely a residential application. It was used in context so that the master could have one key that person, presumably a man, could go anywhere in the residential property. That meant the living quarters, and then living quarters other than the family's living quarters. So the master could go anywhere, is the context in which it was used. And that was very interesting, in fact. And I believe what a nice thing to do might be to look at one of those old catalogs. So let's switch now to the screen view and let's take a closer look at that catalog. Now, I had mentioned it was a Corbin catalog, and it is. I think it's the 1905. So from my site, we're going to type in Corbin. We'll try to spell it correctly first. And we'll click on any of these items, and we're going to get to the manufacturer's page. And you can also get to the manufacturer's page just by the word manufacturers. It comes back the same way. And once that page comes up, you can do a find function on your keyboard for Corbin, and then you'll be on the manufacturer's page. And I have several archival catalogs here, and it is indeed the 1905 catalog. And I've already loaded this catalog. I've already gotten to the right page that we want to talk about and pay a little closer attention to. Just interesting to be able to look and see what Corbin was doing 120 years ago almost. So what's very interesting is that Corbin cylinders contain balls of German silver to give greater ease of operation and to reduce the wear by eliminating friction. In the master keyed cylinder, a master ring surrounds the key plug. That's what a master ring cylinder looks like. And what Corbin was doing after they paid for the master ring patent, they were master keying in master ring cylinders. And as it says, a master ring surrounds the key plug. The change key operates the key plug, and the master key operates by lining up the breaks and the pins at the outer line of the master ring. So that's it right there. So a few elements. The German silver ball, that's because the material science of the key blanks and the pin tumblers were such that wear was a real problem. They reduced the amount of friction by putting in these tiny ball bearings into the cylinder. And you can still put those in today. They're still available. But they got increasingly to the point where they didn't put them in all chambers, and were putting them in only the first chamber, ultimately, because that is the chamber that saw all of the wear. The 5-cut, the 4-cut, the 3-cut, the 2-cut, and the 1-cut all go through that first chamber. But back over here in the 5th chamber, you've only got one part of the key hitting it, not every part of the key hitting it. So I have learned from other people, or I've heard it said, that over the decades, the amount of balls that were used in the chambers was reduced as a result of the improvement in material science. So that, first of all, that's why that is there. Then you have your plug and then your master ring. So you would combinate this cylinder so that change keys were combinated right to this shear line. Your master keys would be combinated to this top shear line, and they would literally add what is now called a build-up pin to do that. You've got a driver, you've got a build-up pin, and then you've got your standard bottom pin. So that's how they were doing that. Now, the reason they were doing that is because it prevented them from having ghost keys or incidental masters, is why they did that. It was a problem early on because they didn't have our modern science of methods of progression, which we're going to do an extremely deep dive later in this primer. This combines in a single shell 2 cylinders using the same keyway for both the change key and the master key. And what they were advertising is you get 2 locks for the price of 1 is what they were advertising. You could have rights and privileges of 2 different requirements in one single lock, rather than have, some arrangement where you have multiple locks on the door. You can have rights and privileges assigned to whomever you give that key to. So the master, we're speaking about a person in this case, he holds the master key, or she, I guess, and that key is going to operate up at this shear line, but every other key or a submaster or a subservient key would operate down here at the plug line, the plug shear line. Corbin master keyed locks are master keyed in one set of any number of changes, all different with a master key to pass, or in any number of sets of any number of changes, all different with master keys to pass each set and a grandmaster key to pass all. So they're using pretty broad language there in terms of using the word all, any number. We know today that that's not, of course, true. There are absolute limitations to the number of changes that you can achieve, but they were basically saying, with this technology where we insulate our master key from the plug line, they were saying we could accommodate any size project you can throw at us. And it's probably because they didn't hit a size project that exceeded the limitations, or they were actually unaware of the limitations, and that's very true as well. And just one other thing, this master ring it might seem to you larger than it ought to, and that's because it is. It is an 1.5 inch diameter cylinder. These cylinder faces over here, that's going to be your 1 5/32 diameter cylinder. This cylinder over here is 1.5 inches. Anyway, so just a walk back in time, so to speak, to talk about master keying. Let's switch back to the screen view and wrap up this portion of master keying. Okay, so to move on in our short paragraph, master keying provides convenience as I've said, capability through weakness. And along with that, you are also introducing obsolescence as well. So Master Keying provides convenience. It allows different key holders to pass through different doors and cylinders. But it does so by creating a known substantial additional level of weakness through the cylinder. In addition to that added weakness, you are rendering the system obsolescent sooner rather than later, sooner rather than cylinders that were just single keyed. I would say Ralph is an advocate of not master keying and doing only so when it serves a purpose and is implemented in the least insecure way possible. I know this because I've sat in class with Ralph as the instructor, 2 of them in fact, and I've also read his article, at least one that he's had published in the Aloha Keynotes magazine, where he argues, master keying, are you sure you need it? Are you really, really sure you need it? Because you will probably want to know that these are the negative side effects of master keying. Master keying is not something that is done to give people holding the master key additional power, even though one key can be made to pass everywhere. But if that same person who insisted on the master key understood the effects of master keying cylinders, as now will be your job to potentially educate your client base, they might say, oh, that makes perfect sense to me. If I pin a cylinder with one change key and one master key, how many keys work that cylinder? In a 6-pin environment, a 2-step 6-pin environment, if you pin a cylinder to a change key and a master key, how many keys work that cylinder? 2, right? Well, those 2 keys work, that's true, but that's the wrong answer. If I master key and I use total position progression, I should qualify that. If I'm using total position progression and I put a master pin in all 6 chambers, not 2 keys work it, not 4 keys work it, not 8 keys work it, not 16 keys work it, not 32 keys work it. 64 keys will work that cylinder. And when you put that into the mind of the person who's saying, I want a master key, but then 62 additional keys will work that cylinder as well, they might say, oh, I understand that is a weakness. And we're going to talk about the Dayton method later on as well, a way to exploit this weakness. It goes to bolster Ralph's initial argument of, are you sure you need master keying? Understand the totality of what you're bringing in when you master key. Ralph, being a mathematician by training, he was a high school math teacher and he holds a master's in mathematics before he became an Aloha ACE instructor, sees locksmithing perhaps in a way that most others do not. And if you have a chance to take a class taught by him, jump at it. Contact Aloha and ask about upcoming classes taught by Ralph. My guess is that he teaches several times a year, and the year is 2021 right now, COVID notwithstanding. He probably is quite active in the teaching area. So that wraps up what is master keying, a little bit of history on Corbin's take of master keying, why it might not be a great idea, but all of this we're going to talk about as we go through as well. So let's move on to the next section, pinning charts.